They called her barren, cast her aside, and made her believe she was broken, all because she couldn't have children. Her husband left for a younger woman, and the world watched in silence as Sarah's life was dismantled. But fate led her to a quiet warrior and a stream of abandoned children who saw in her what no one else did: a mother. Just wait until you hear how this powerful story unfolds, and why, in the end, justice didn't just return, it stood tall. Sarah Mason stood on the porch of her childhood home in Wyoming, her figure outlined by the amber light of a sinking sun. The dry wind tugged gently at her hair, but she didn't move. She stood still, frozen, clutching a worn leather suitcase that had seen more dust than purpose. It was nearly empty. Not because she forgot to pack, but because, in 10 years of marriage, she had never truly owned anything that was hers. Inside were only his clothes, Josh's shirts, Josh's old ties, Josh's belts. She had packed them out of habit, out of duty, out of the numbness that follows the final crack in something long broken. In her other hand, she held the divorce papers. Her fingers trembled as if they were the ones being divorced. The signature at the bottom was Josh's, crisp and confident. But it was the note scrawled beside it, in the looping handwriting of his mother, that pierced deeper than any gavel in a courtroom. "It's not your fault, dear. You just can't give him what a real man needs: a family." Those words didn't shock Sarah. They echoed what she'd heard for years, in whispers at the grocery store, in the awkward silences at church, in the shallow eyes of women who once smiled wide before they learned she was barren. "A hollow tree," one woman had said behind cupped hands, and "a wife in name only," another muttered to her sister. The town never said it to her face, but truth always found its way to her ears. Josh hadn't left with anger. He left with indifference. For a younger woman from his office, barely 26, who laughed too loud and already had a slight curve at her belly. That's what hurt more than anything. He found what she could never give, and never looked back. Her sister, once close, had grown distant too. "Maybe it's God's will," she'd said softly on the phone, as if that was supposed to soothe. So Sarah drove away. No destination, just movement, just away. Away from the house, from the whispers, from the grief carved into every corner of a life she hadn't chosen but endured. For 2 days, she drifted through forgotten roads in her dusty Chevrolet, listening only to the hum of tires and the sound of her own breath, until the engine gave out somewhere in the belly of the prairie. No gas stations, no signs of life, no mercy. She stepped out into the heat. Red dust bit at her cheeks, and the air hung heavy with silence. Nothing but dry grass, sun-bleached rocks, and a sky too big for someone so small. Her car was dead. Her phone had no signal. The only things alive were the circling buzzards in the distance. And then, a shadow. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, a silhouette on horseback, moving through the haze like a ghost from an older world. He drew closer, a tall man, wrapped in leather and earth tones, with long black hair braided down his back and a bow slung across his shoulders. His face was carved like stone, strong, weathered, unreadable. His eyes, dark as midnight soil, met hers without judgment, only stillness. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask what she'd done. He dismounted silently, walked over to her, opened the car door, and gently took the suitcase from the passenger seat. Then, with calm strength, he tied it to his saddle. "You're not dying today," he said in a voice low and even, like the hush before a desert storm. And just like that, Sarah Mason followed a stranger into the unknown, with nothing left to lose but the weight she'd carried far too long. Eli's ranch sat far beyond the limits of what most would call civilization. There were no power lines stretching toward the horizon, no cell towers, no mailbox, not even a dirt road that stayed the same after each rain. Just endless hills, open skies, and the wind that whispered through the tall grass as if it had stories of its own. The place wasn't on any map, and that was exactly why he lived there. Sarah stayed in the guest house, a modest cabin built from sun-bleached timber and stone, tucked beside the larger lodge where Eli slept. There was no electricity, no running water. She washed her clothes by hand in a tin basin behind the shed, boiled water over fire, and cooked simple meals on an old wood stove that hissed and breathed like a living creature. And yet, she felt at peace. For the first time in years, no one asked her when she'd try again. No one looked at her with sympathy masked as kindness. There were no whispered prayers for her womb, no backhanded blessings. Only quiet. And silence, she realized, wasn't empty. It was full of healing. Eli never hovered. He didn't ask why she cried herself to sleep some nights or why she stared at the hills for hours as if searching for something she'd lost long ago. He didn't try to fix her, he just let her be. He moved like the earth, steady, unchanging, present. His gestures were small but meaningful. Leaving wood by her door before sunrise, placing an extra blanket on the line before a cold night, sharpening her kitchen knives without a word. She often watched him from the porch, the way he moved with the horses, how he spoke to them in low tones, not commands, how he listened more than he talked, even to the wind. He was a man carved by solitude, but not bitter, and she couldn't understand why someone like him would help someone like her, a stranger, broken and discarded. One night, as they sat outside beneath the stars, a fire crackling between them, Eli finally spoke. His eyes stayed on the flames. "My wife died giving birth," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. "So did the boy. That day, the world went quiet in a way it never did before. Since then, I've lived with the spirits. Some days they're silent. Some days they scream." Sarah didn't answer. Her throat closed around something too heavy for words. She hadn't lost a child. She'd never had the chance. But somehow their pain felt the same, like two branches torn from different trees by the same storm. She cried quietly, not from pity, but from recognition. When spring came, Sarah started packing. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she didn't want to overstay a kindness. She wasn't here to be saved. She wanted to walk away with dignity, to thank Eli and go rebuild whatever pieces of herself remained. On the morning she planned to leave, Eli handed her an envelope. Weathered, yellowed at the edges. "Someone brought this from town," he said simply. It was from Josh. "You can come back. Melissa's gone. I was wrong. We can try again." Her hands clenched the letter until the paper crinkled and creased. For a moment, she didn't breathe. This was everything she'd begged for, wept for, prayed for just a year ago. And now, it was in her hand, like a rope tossed into dark water. But her heart didn't leap. It didn't even stir. There was no longing left, just stillness. That night, she lit a fire behind the cabin. The Wyoming wind danced through the flames. She held the letter over the kindling, hesitating just once, not for what was written, but for what it represented. The ghost of a life that never belonged to her. Then she let it go. The flames curled around the paper, turning promises and regrets into ash. Watching it burn, Sarah felt something break free inside her. Not grief, not anger, just release. She wasn't going back. Because the woman who would have said yes no longer existed. And the woman who remained had just begun to rise. It was a quiet morning when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, barely louder than the wind rustling through the grass. Sarah opened the door and blinked into the early light. Standing there was a girl, no older than 10, barefoot. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair tangled, and her small arms bore the faint shadows of bruises. But it was her eyes that held Sarah still, not with fear, but with the hollow exhaustion of someone who had seen too much and hoped for too little. Her name was Ashley. She said it softly, as if unsure it was still hers. Her mother had passed away days before. The girl didn't use the word. She just said she stopped waking up. Her father, long gone, no relatives, no neighbors who would take her in, just Eli's ranch. Just a last instinctive turn of the feet toward where the land felt safe. Sarah didn't ask for more. She stepped aside, guided Ashley inside, and made her a bowl of warm stew left over from the night before. The girl ate without looking up, spoon trembling in her hand. Later, Sarah brought her a clean dress and a basin of water. Then she knelt and wrapped her arms around the child, not out of pity, but from something deeper. Something that moved without words. Ashley stayed, and the house shifted. Weeks passed. Then came Jaden, a wiry boy with skinned knees and wary eyes who had run away from a group home hours south. He never explained why. Sarah never forced him to. She let him sleep in the hayloft the first night. By the third, he was setting the table and learning how to fry eggs without burning the edges. Then came the twins, Emma and Ellie. Their mother had died in a highway accident during a snowstorm. No next of kin, no one to speak their names in the courtroom. They were quiet as shadows when the state worker dropped them off. But Sarah saw the way their hands always found each other's. She gave them the attic room and painted stars on the ceiling herself. The last was Thomas, small, wide-eyed, barely 5. His father, a miner from the hills, had vanished one morning and left him on a stranger's porch. No papers, no suitcase. Only a name and a tired voice that repeated, "Daddy said someone would want me." Sarah didn't search for these children. They arrived like echoes in the wind, unexpected, vulnerable, and full of a need she recognized all too well. Not the need for toys or food, though she gave them both, but the need to belong, to be seen, to be told that their pain didn't make them broken. She became their guardian in every way the law would allow. She stood before judges, filing paperwork with hands that once trembled from her own rejection. She argued with school officials when Jaden was suspended for defending Emma from a bully. She learned how to braid hair, how to mend scraped knees, how to cook 5 different breakfasts at once. And more importantly, she listened to their stories, their fears, their hopes spoken in half-formed sentences. Eli watched it all from a quiet distance. He never interrupted. He'd carry lumber while Thomas clung to his leg. He'd fix the fence while Ashley followed behind, asking about every knot and tool. He was there, a silent presence, unshakable as ever. One evening, as the sun painted the fields in gold, Sarah heard a small voice behind her while hanging clothes to dry. "Mom?" It was Ashley. Her voice wasn't a question. It was a statement, brave and certain. Sarah turned slowly. The breath caught in her chest. She wanted to answer, but tears reached her first. Eli stood nearby, leaning against the porch post, watching with those still, dark eyes of his. He said nothing for a long time. Then gently, "You're not barren, Sarah. Your path was just through wounded hearts, not through the womb." The words settled over her like a blessing, like truth long buried. And in that moment, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She was not broken. She was a mother. 8 years had passed, and everyone in the county knew one unspoken truth. If you were a child with nowhere to go, you went to Sarah Mason. No paperwork needed, no explanations required. Just a knock on the door of the house they called the Edge Home. The name wasn't just about its place on the rim of a sandstone canyon, though the view from the back porch did stretch for miles over wild ridges and golden valleys. It was because the children who arrived there were all on the edge, of fear, of despair, of being forgotten. But the moment they crossed that fence, the moment Sarah opened the door with her soft, steady voice and her weathered hands, they stepped back from that edge. Ashley was now in her final year of college, studying psychology with a heart full of purpose. She wanted to help children like the one she had been. She called Sarah every Sunday, never ending the call without "Love you, Mom." Jaden had joined the local fire academy. Tall now, stronger, and still quietly protective. He visited often, always checking the locks on the barn doors and fixing anything loose. Habits he picked up during his first years under Sarah's roof. The twins, Emma and Ellie, were artists. They spent their afternoons creating hand-drawn comic books about a heroine who looked just like Sarah, saving children from shadowy monsters, always with a lantern in one hand and a warm blanket in the other. And Thomas, the youngest, had grown into a thoughtful teenager with a curious mind and an old soul. One day, while helping Sarah in the garden, he looked up at her and asked with the simplicity only children carry, "If I ever have a baby, can I name them after you?" Sarah had smiled through tears that filled her eyes without warning. In town, her name had become more than a name. It was a symbol. At the local school, during a class project titled, "Who do you admire most in your community?" every single child in 2nd grade, without hesitation, said the same name, Sarah Mason. She never asked for praise. She never wanted attention. But even those who once judged her now spoke her name with respect, because they had seen what she built, not with bricks, but with love, not with money, but with presence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyons and the sky turned the color of embers, Sarah stood on the porch. In her hand was a photograph, yellowed edges, faded ink. It showed a younger version of herself in a white wedding dress. standing stiffly beside a man who once promised her forever. Her eyes in the picture held something distant, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the soul. She looked at it for a long time, then gently she tore it in half. The wind caught the pieces, lifting them high into the sky before they vanished into the canyon below. "You're no one now," she whispered softly, not with bitterness but with peace. "And I'm someone. I'm a mother of 5, and the wife of a warrior." Behind her, the steady sound of wood being chopped echoed from the clearing where Eli worked, his figure moving rhythmically in the last light of day. Laughter spilled from the kitchen where the scent of fresh bread filled the air. The home was alive, not with perfection, but with belonging. Sarah had once lost everything, her marriage, her place in the world, even her belief that she had anything left to give. But in that vast and rugged place, surrounded by children who were once lost and now found, she had discovered something she never even dared to dream. She had become the kind of woman whose heart wasn't just a place to love, it had become a home. And the heartbeat of that home rang out in 5 different voices, each calling her by the same name, Mom.